Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all our esteemed chief guests, enthusiasts, and audience who have joined us today. With great delight, we welcome all of you to TNtalk. Let us start the program with the invocation of the melodious Tamil Thai Varthu.
நீராறும் கடலொடுத்த நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் வதனமென திகழ் பரத கண்டமிதில் தெக்கனமும் அது சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறம் வியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
Thank you. Today we have gathered here to engage in insightful discussion, broaden our perspectives, and learn from one of the most esteemed minds in the field of economics. We are privileged to have with us Dr. C.P. Chandrasekar, a distinguished economist, scholar, and thought leader whose contribution to the study of development economics, financial systems, and globalization has been widely recognized. His in-depth analysis and profound insights continue to shape discussions on economic policies and their impact on society. On behalf of the Directorate of Public Libraries and Anna Centenary Library, I extend a heartfelt welcome to Dr. C.P. Chandrasekar. Let us start with a brief introduction of our speaker. Dr. C.P. Chandrasekar is a distinguished economist with over 30 years of teaching and research experience at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His expertise spans finance, industrial policy, and economic reforms in developing nations. He has held prestigious positions including visiting senior lecturer at School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and executive editor at Deccan Herald. As a prolific writer, he has authored and co-authored influential books such as The Market That Failed, Demonetization Decoded, Crisis as Conquest, Karl Marx, Capital and the Present. His insightful column appear in Frontline, Business Line, and Economic and Political Weekly. He has served as a consultant for several international organizations like United Nations Development Programme, ILO, ADB, etc. Recognized for his contributions, he received the Malcolm Adiseshaya Award in 2009 for excellence in development studies. Audience, please put your hands together to welcome our guest. Now it is felicitation time. I'd like to call upon Dr. Santana Karthikeyan, Librarian and Information Officer of Anna Centenary Library, to felicitate our chief guest with a memento. We eagerly look forward to your thoughts and perspectives that will surely enrich our understanding and spark meaningful discussion, sir. Now the stage is all yours, sir.
Is it okay? Am I audible? Yeah, clear enough. Good afternoon, and I must begin by thanking the Anna Centenary Library, the Tamil Nadu Science Forum, and all the others who are involved in organizing this for inviting me to speak here. I grew up in this state, so even though I've been in Delhi for many years, it's a privilege always to come back to Chennai, when I was here, Madras, and interact with all of you all. What I intend looking at very briefly today is to look at the implications of the coming of what seems to be a dramatic change in the global geopolitical economy. It's really going to be only 2 months since the second stint of Donald Trump as President of the United States, and there have been a dramatic set of both announcements and policies which have been implemented. And in the economic sphere, on the sphere of political economy generally, there have been about 3 or 4 areas in which the moves have been quite stark and significant. The first, of course, is that Trump started by beginning to implement what he said was going to be the imposition of significant tariffs on imports into the United States in order to be able to bring factories back or production back to the US from the rest of the world where it had been offshored over a period of time. He threatened to put these tariffs on some of his closest allies, on Mexico, on Canada, on Europe, and of course he was going to put tariffs on China. And to top it all, he said that he's going to have a set of reciprocal tariffs, that is, he would impose, besides these additional tariffs, equivalent tariffs to any taxes which are levied on American imports into other countries, an equivalent reciprocal tax. Of course, at the moment, we know that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico are on hold till April. The 10% additional tax on top of what was imposed on China is in place across a range of commodities. There is talk that there's going to be implementation of the reciprocal tax in April, and basically the whole idea is that it's a combination of trying to assure the white working class, which voted for Trump to bring him back to power from what seemed to be almost criminal wilderness, given the cases which had been launched against him. So it is to appease the white working class in part, but it also is being weaponized as an instrument to achieve both economic and strategic goals, in particular in favor of American capital. The second tendency which we are observing is an extremely aggressive effort to demand trade and investment concessions on the part of competing countries or countries in which which are the trade and economic partners of the United States, including the countries in Europe. And this has gone to the extent of actually Trump demanding that he get access to territory or to facilities which vary from the Panama Canal to land which is the Gaza Strip, which he wants to convert into the Riviera, to Greenland, which he wants to take over, and he said that he's going to actually send the military in. But basically, taking an extremely aggressive stance in terms of saying that I want access to facilities and territory, which is going to improve the status on the position of US capitalism as a global hegemon. The third aspect which we observe is that along with this tendency to demand these kinds of or making these kinds of statements with regard to territorial ambitions, we seem to have a tendency on his part to identify areas in which there are crucial critical minerals which are important from the point of view of the new stage we are in terms of industrial transformation. That is, we basically are looking at areas which have critical minerals which go into, let's say, the new energy sectors and so on. So he wants that in Ukraine. He wants that. He wants a deal with Ukraine in which, in return for ending the war in Ukraine and giving some degree of security, which is of course going to be financed by the Europeans and not by the US anymore, he actually wants to take the critical minerals as a payoff for his role in Ukraine. He wants to do the same thing in Greenland, where kryptonite and such other critical minerals are available. And he's trying to do that wherever he thinks that it's possible for him to get access to these minerals on terms which he sees have to be special, given the role of the United States as markets for these countries globally. And finally, what we have is that he wants to, in some sense, while he has this aggressive tendency with regard to trade and investment, etc., he's taking a position that he wants to withdraw America's role as the global police person, that he doesn't want America to be the policeman of the world and finance that. He wants countries in Europe and Japan and other countries to finance their own defense. And he says that it's been a free run for too long. So in some sense, he's to achieve his goals, which includes, of course, finding new markets. He's got to an extent where he's taking positions with regard to Russia, which is completely in opposition to the role which Biden took, or the previous president took, the position which NATO took. And of course, he's basically saying that I'm going to have a transactional relationship with Russia in order to get myself benefits for American capital. And I'm not interested in continuing this relationship with Europe, which has been exploiting our markets and not paying for its own defense. So we're going to dump Europe, and we're actually going to be in a situation in which we can actually sleep with the enemy, which is basically to arrive at a certain agreement or relationship with Russia. We can have a position which says that, listen, there might be something positive about this from the point of view of bringing the war to an end, but it is, as far as the relationship between the United States and Europe is concerned, a complete break with what we had in the past. And we now even have a Security Council resolution in which France, Britain, etc. abstained from voting, even though the vote was going against their position on Ukraine. So put all of this together, and basically what we seem to have is a fundamental transformation of the relationship between what is still, even if a weakening and waning global hegemon, the relationship between the global hegemon of capitalism and capitalism itself. That he seems to be in a position that, taking the position that in order to save American capitalism from itself, what he's going to do is adopt an aggressive posture with regard to trade, investment, territory, minerals, and so on and so forth, to actually create a whole new neo-colonial environment on behalf of US capital. And he's able to simultaneously, he hopes, to pay off the white working class, which, having been left behind by globalization, which actually, having been in a situation in which, particularly in the Rust Belt, where industry disappeared because it had got relocated to China and elsewhere, to Mexico and China and Canada, etc., that he thinks that he can partly pay them off by whatever he gets as a result of this aggressive posture in the international in the international environment, including, of course, the revenues he would get from the large taxes he puts on imports into the United States. So he pays off the white working class, but as we can see, that he is facilitating the capture of the US state by big capital. It's not just that all the top capitalists or the industrialists, the business people, including in the technology sectors, were lined up behind him on the day he was being sworn in. But what you had in addition was that you have Musk now being the principal agent who's been allowed to go with a wrecking ball, with a sledgehammer against the US state itself. So DOGE, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, is basically deciding that you're going to have a substantial degree of curtailing of the operations of the US state in order to release resources by saving ostensibly large amounts of expenditure. The estimate which Elon Musk himself has put out is that he expects to save something like $50 billion a year. And the idea is that you use these $50 billion to provide concessions, tax concessions and other concessions to US capital. And finally, in this effort at allowing or facilitating the capture of the US state by US capital, an interesting tendency has been, of course, that he wants to completely undermine all efforts at regulation which had been built up and which remain still, because there's been substantial liberalization ever since Ronald Reagan in the United States. But two agencies in particular, one is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is now brought under the White House by an executive order, and the Federal Trade Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission was taking a tough position with regard, diluted but tough position with regard to cryptocurrency in particular. Trump backs cryptocurrency. He wants to facilitate speculation by finance in this asset. So he basically wants the powers of the Securities and Exchange Commission to be completely undermined. Trump also wants to undermine the Federal Trade Commission because under Lina Khan, as head of the FTC had gone after Amazon and Meta, saying that they are indulging in monopolistic practices which are against the interests of the citizenry and the consumer and small businesses in the United States. So you basically not only are trying to to allow a direct capture by bringing in people from business into senior positions in his cabinet. But you're also having a situation in which you're saying that I'm going to completely rehaul, dilute and undermine the regulatory framework, or even discard or dump the regulatory framework, such as to facilitate a greater ease for the operation of American capital. Now, how do we interpret this? We can interpret it as saying that, listen, this is just a maverick who's come to power, and you don't know what he says one thing today, he's going to say another thing tomorrow, and the world has to suffer him for 4 years because of the fact that he's a madman in power in what is one of the most powerful positions in the world today. But there seems to be a method in that madness, and I would like to argue that the method in that madness can be understood by looking at this whole set of moves which have come in such rapid succession right at the beginning of a 4-year term, and therefore is going to only continue and get intensified and consolidated over the next few years, that we have to see this as an effort within capitalism to restructure capitalism, which has lost its legitimacy, and which is actually in a situation in which, having come out partly because of large infusion of funds on the part of the state and the Federal Reserve out of the 2008 financial crisis, when we thought we were going to have another Great Depression in the world, having come out of that, what you're actually what you're actually observing is that once again there's a huge amount of fragility. You must have read about all these banks, Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, Signature Bank, and so on, which either failed or had to be merged with other banks because of the fact that they were going to fail. So fragility still remains. It's not only in the United States, of course, it is also in Europe, because Credit Suisse had to be taken over by UBS because Credit Suisse went bankrupt. But basically what you're having is that you have a capitalism which came into, which is currently, in particular after the 2008 crisis, completely lost its legitimacy, had thought it had saved itself, but actually is now once again finding itself getting undermined from within because of its own internal contradictions. And what we need to do is to see what Trump is doing as an effort to restructure capitalism in order to save capitalism from itself, as it were. And in particular, in this case, he's basically saying that I don't care about capitalism in the rest of the world. I want to save US capitalism, and I'm going to do it at the expense of everybody else. Now, is this uncommon under capitalism? It's not. We've seen many efforts at restructuring capital in a fundamental form in the history of capitalism. And let's just look at the 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st century. We know that the first major effort to restructure capitalism came after the Great Depression of the 1930s, when 25% of the American workforce was unemployed, when it was very clear that markets were not functioning, that capitalism as a system is ruined with contradictions. There was a Soviet Union which at that point of time was doing quite well. So there was a threat that the Great Depression and the consequences it had for the working people of the United States is going to actually unleash revolutionary fervor of some sort. So there was huge pressure, and we had President Roosevelt, who came to power in 1933, and then in 1934 began a process which is broadly called the New Deal, to restructure capitalism. And what he did was brought into capitalism the idea that you can't leave capitalism to itself, to the market, to be able to resolve its deep contradictions. What you need is the state to intervene. The state must intervene with strong fiscal policies, with expenditure policies, financed, if necessary, by borrowing. And they began to do this. Within a few years, unemployment in the United States under Roosevelt, under Roosevelt's New Deal, which of course was theorized in some sense or got the support of the theories of John Maynard Keynes, and therefore is spoken of as the first instance of the Keynesian revolution being implemented in practice. So you had a situation in which you had a complete turn, where instead of believing in the role of markets to be as being capable of generating full employment, you said markets can never generate full employment, and what we need to do is the state to come in and ensure that you can push the system towards near full employment at least. Now, it's true that unemployment came down. It came down to 10%. But it was not because of what happened only as part of the New Deal that America managed to save itself from the Great Depression and its consequences. It managed to save itself from the Great Depression and its consequences because of the Second World War and America's entry into the Second World War, because there is no economy like a war economy in which the state is in complete command of the system. So you put the state in complete command of the system because of the fact that you were engaged in war, you were brought into decided to enter into the Second World War, and that Second World War allowed you to pull yourself out of the Great Depression. Besides the New Deal, but more important than the New Deal, was the role of war in saving capitalism from itself at that point of time. But there was another thing which the war generated, which was that during the war, there was a huge amount of research and development which was undertaken for defense reasons, for reasons of the war. And of course, we know that it led up to the worst thing which we know about technology, which is the atom bomb, with what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But as part of that research, there were a huge number of spin-offs of defense research, which actually didn't serve defense needs, but came out as collateral as you were undertaking this defense R&D, which was available like technologies on a shelf, which could be exploited as soon as the war was over and you returned to normalcy. So the so-called scientific and technological revolution, which came in the period after the Second World War in the United States and in other countries, was a scientific and technological revolution which was based on the spin-offs of defense research and the technologies it generated during the period of the Second World War. Now, what did that do? That once you had peace and you started implementing these technologies, started using these technologies, some of it was used outside the United States. Liquid crystal dial was commercialized by the Japanese, even though it came out of defense research in the United States. But anyway, you actually saw huge increases in productivity in the period after the Second World War, and people describe this as a kind of S&T revolution, scientific and technological revolution, which capitalism was going through. Now, these two things, coming out of the depression because of the Second World War and getting yourself rapid increases in productivity because of technological spin-offs in the Second World War, meant that capitalism, as a result of what is seen as Keynesianism and the New Deal, got restructured and entered into a phase which we describe as the Golden Age. There has been no period in the history of capitalism where it has been as successful as it was between the end of the Second World War and the early 1970s, when you had faced an inflationary crisis. You all must have read, when post-COVID there was inflation, people said, oh, we are going back to the 1970s, because that's the memory, that an inflationary crisis came to the United States and Western Europe in the 1970s. But during this period of the Golden Age, because of the rapid increases in technology and because of the intervention of the state intervened, even in a way in which it pushed the system towards near full employment. Now, normally when a system like capitalism goes towards near full employment, because now workers are strong, because you're near full employment, unions are strong, and therefore you end up with a situation in which there's no real fear of the sack. The threat of the sack doesn't apply anymore. Wages tend to rise. If wages tend to rise, prices tend to rise because capitalists are going to protect their profits. So you get a wage price spiral, and that could result in inflation. But during the Golden Age, you not only had high growth, you not only had near full employment, you had low inflation. This was incredible, unseen in the history of capitalism. And the question is why? The answer is, the reason that happened is because all of this productivity increase you got as a result of the scientific and technological revolution, which came out of the war, of course, that it resulted in productivity rising faster than wages, even though wages were rising because workers were fully employed. And because productivity was rising faster than wages, increases in wages did not lead to increases in prices, because you not only could cover the increase in wages, you could also get a little bit of profit, and therefore you also invested, and this process generated for you this combination of low unemployment, high growth, and low inflation. So that was one major restructuring. But look at this restructuring. That restructuring generated for you the welfare state. The whole idea was that the state must not merely spend, but it must spend in a way in which it redistributes income to a certain extent, at least to the middle and lower middle classes, if not to the working class. And therefore, it was actually a state intervening to redistribute income from the top deciles to the middle and lower middle deciles of the population. So it had a positive, progressive, redistributive effect. That was part of the New Deal, which is what gave capitalism its legitimacy post the Great Depression and saved it from the ignominy of being compared with, at that point of time, what was a very successful Soviet Union. And in fact, everybody said, oh, we should be inspired by the Russian Revolution, because look, they don't have unemployment and we are stuck with this huge amount of unemployment. Now, what happened in the 70s is that this came to an end. This came to an end because once you did not have the benefit of those rapid increases in productivity because you had exhausted most of these technologies which came out of the war, You could no more have increases in productivity which increase faster than wages. But more importantly, the other thing which you had done during the Golden Age was through colonial and neo-colonial exploitation, you kept commodity prices down. In particular, you kept the price of oil down. These were highly energy-intensive countries. And you kept the oil prices down because the Seven Sisters controlled all of the oil reserves in West Asia and the Gulf. So at some point of time, as the boom occurred, these countries said that, listen, we are in a world of decolonization. We are not in the world of the old kind of colonization post the Second World War. We are going to take over our own oil reserves. And they took over their oil reserves, formed OPEC, controlled production and supply. And you had 150% increase in oil prices. So the ability to be able to curb inflation, not merely because of productivity increases which were greater than money wage increases, but also because of the fact that you could keep commodity prices down at the expense of third world peasants, third world miners, and third world energy producers. Because you could do that, you could get yourself the golden age. So it was not just because of the fact that there was a sharp John Maynard Keynes. It was because of the fact that capitalism worked itself out through the use of its hegemonic position in order to be able to save itself from the consequences of the Great Depression. Now the point is, this ended, one, because of the fact that you couldn't keep getting productivity increases, and two, because of the fact that commodity producers in general, but particularly the producers of energy, decided that enough is enough, and therefore energy prices shot up. And that essentially meant that both wages were going up, input prices were going up, productivity was not increasing so fast, and you got an inflation. That was the 1970s inflation, when Paul Volcker was brought as the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, and he decided to contract America, push back demand as much as possible in order to bring down inflation by raising interest rates from 2%, 3% to 9.5% and 12% and so on, in order to be able to deflate the economy, to actually push the economy down. And there was a backlash against public spending. It is because the government is spending so much money, it's because of all this Keynesianism that you're actually having this inflationary crisis, it was said. And we had a shift at that point of time, which was a shift which was heralded at the political level by the likes of Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom and Ronald Reagan in the United States. Now what was happening at that point of time? That because of the crisis in American manufacturing, which set in the 1970s and after, there was a rise or an increase in the power of finance. And the increase in the power of finance meant that finance which had been reined in as part of the New Deal, using what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, which was passed in 1933 and implemented from 1934, that you began to dismantle it in the United States. You started giving financial interests more and more power. Finance grew very rapidly. There was a huge diversification of the financial sector, and it became larger and larger in terms of assets. Financial profits as a percentage of total profits increased. Financial wealth relative to real wealth increased. So we entered the age of finance. And in the age of finance, what you actually decided to do was that you're going to control inflation by offshoring, by taking production to the countries in the world which had this large reserve army of labor. But you're going to act simultaneously, you're going to make your profits, because American capital is going to produce there, even if America is not producing those goods. And in America, finance is going to actually try and bring back as much of those profits as possible by going into the international system as the dominant player in financial markets, which got liberalized all over the world through the wave of liberalization. In that period, we know that what actually happened is that capital which had been reined in as part, which had been pulled back as part of the restructuring effort which came after the Great Depression as part of the New Deal, now suddenly found itself having power. And you begin to see exactly the opposite of what we saw after the Great Depression. The crisis of 1970s resulted in the state giving more power to capital and redistributing income now from the bottom deciles of the population back to the rich, to the top 1%. You look at any curve of the post-tax distribution of income in the United States and look at what's the share of the top 1% or the top 5%, you'll see a huge increase in share between 1968 and about, let's say, 1991. By that time, there had been this huge engineered redistribution of income by the state from the bottom to the top. Okay? You do that kind of thing and you give finance profits, but how does finance make profits in a world of that kind which is hollowed out without manufacturing? It does it by speculation. So we had the banking crisis of the 1980s, we had the dot-com bust, we had the savings and loans crisis, we had the debt crisis in Latin America, we had, of course, the 2008 crisis in the global financial crisis. We've been in an era of continuous increase in prices. If you look at the average number of bank failures in America between 1954, and this is after the war, 1954 and 1985, and 1985 till about the end of the 1990s, it had gone up 25 times. There were 25 times more bank failures every year in the latter period because you had this speculative wave. But what happened in 2008 was that in 2008, the speculation went so far that you actually had the possibility of getting one more Great Depression. But unlike what happened at the time of the Great Depression, unlike what happened at the time of the Great Depression, this time you had no New Deal. This time the deal was the Federal Reserve and the Treasury of the United States would pump money into the financial system in order to save the banks. Not save the people who were being thrown out of work, but to save the banks in order to save capitalism, which meant saving the capitalists, not really saving capitalism. And we know the consequence of that. It's a huge loss of legitimacy. No more can you say that a world dominated by finance is a safe world. It's a world which is full of speculation. It's not a world which is transparent, which is characterized by norms of behavior and accounting principles which are the best, which all countries must adopt. It really is one where you get the worst forms of speculation, but speculation which leads to crisis, which damages the system. But you are not going to go back. You're actually going to save capital, not save capitalism, as you tried to do at the time of the New Deal after the Great Depression. Now, if you do that, are you resolving the problem? No, as I said, the fragility is still there. We know that even though the American economy has been doing poorly after 2008, we've had the longest boom in the New York Stock Exchange. Financial speculation and profits continue. We know that Silicon Valley Bank, which was considered to be this really successful bank in Silicon Valley, servicing the startups of the United States of America, collapsed. It went completely bankrupt. There is this fragility, and therefore, you are not in a situation where that restructuring has actually been completed. It's not a restructuring in which you can do very much in terms of restoring growth. If you want to restore growth, you must now once again engineer a redistribution of income from the top deciles of the population to the middle and lower middle. You create demand, the demand is going to generate growth, and people are not going to actually generate demand on the basis of borrowing from the banks, resulting in this huge amount of increases in household credit, till you get a rising share or percentage of defaults and a crisis in the system. So, seen in that, if you're not going to do a new deal, if you're not going to change the engineered redistribution of income in favor of the top deciles by now actually as a part of the response to the crisis and the loss of legitimacy of capitalism, actually put money back where it should go if you want the economy to function well, and if you do not want to bring the state back in, then what do? You need to find some way in which you can actually try in maverick fashion, make the system work, give it some legitimacy. But you're not giving it legitimacy. What Trump is trying to do is saying that, okay, I can't make the whole of capitalism work, but I'm going to try and make American capitalism works. And I'm going to make American capitalism work at the expense of everybody else, not just at the expense of American workers, not just at the expense of less developed countries, not at the expense of the countries which are faced with huge debt crisis and therefore are faced with deflation, but also at the expense of Canada, of Mexico, of my closest allies, of the United Kingdom, of Europe. I'm going to get all of them to pay for me to be able to save American capitalism in a context in which I am not willing to have a New Deal type of restructuring, but a restructuring in which rather I will pay big capital even more. I will make them sit behind me, listen to me, accept my maverick, mad behavior, praise me, but then they need me because I'm going to save them, because I'm going to save them by being aggressive vis-a-vis the whole of the world. Now, obviously, this, one doesn't even need to go into explaining why this kind of an aggressive posture vis-a-vis the rest of the world, where one country is successful and the rest of the country is in the dumps, it just cannot work. It cannot work in a world which is as integrated as we are. But the whole point is, if you want to continue along the same path, if you want a restructuring which doesn't re-engineer distribution, then you actually have to have a kind of neo-fascist move. We thought that neo-fascism is going to be vis-a-vis the populations of each country within those countries, but what we're observing, it's a neo-fascism in which you have one hegemonic state thinking that at the expense of the whole world, it would be able to save American capitalism from itself. That is the kind of restructuring we have to think of when we're trying to understand why in a period of 2 months has Trump done all what he has done, and why are the rich in America accepting it? Why are the Democrats not able to really do anything about it? It's because of the fact that in this crisis, either there is a shift which challenges capital itself, or you basically have to think of these kinds of maneuvers, these neo-fascist maneuvers, which, as I said, we can wait to see the result, and that result is going to be blatant failure. I think I'll stop here. Yeah.
We thank you for sharing your invaluable analysis, insight and expertise, sir. Thank you so much. Now, the floor is open for question and answer session. Audience, if you have a question, you can raise your hand. The mic will come to you.
Thank you, sir. Since Trump came to power and right before that, the value of the dollar has been increasing, or that's what is being said. But some people are saying, no, that's not what's happening. The rupee value is falling. So in the international market, in comparison to the dollar, the rupee appears value lesser. But now that you're mentioning about how the whole Trump coming is about saving US capitalism, is that how the value of dollar is increasing? But also with respect to sanctions that the country has mentioned, wouldn't that actually lead to fall in the value of dollar? But I mean, simply, why is the value of dollar increasing?
Well, if you, I suppose if you are going to impose large tariffs, if he finally does impose tariffs not just in China, but across the world, not just in India and China maybe, but on Europe and Mexico and Canada, etc., that is going to boost production in the United States, because you're actually going to say that a market which used to be serviced by imports now cannot be serviced by imports at the same prices, and therefore there would be a boost to American production. And I think in the first instance, people thought that this therefore, I mean people meaning finance thought that this therefore, or wealth holders, I wouldn't say this finance, wealth holders thought that this is something which is going to be good for America. So there is not merely the old flight for safety of wealth into the US dollar, because there is uncertainty in the rest of the world, including the Eurozone. But now you thought that there's going to be a strengthening of the US economy, and therefore you went in the direction of the US dollar. Now, as far as the Indian rupee is concerned, it is true. It is true that part of the reason, I mean, a significant part of the depreciation of the Indian rupee is actually a mirror image of the appreciation of the dollar. And it is possible for the central bank to intervene, for the Reserve Bank of India to intervene to try and prevent that faster depreciation. But the problem is many of the countries who are competitors of India in the global market, their currencies are depreciating vis-a-vis the dollar even more than the Indian rupee is depreciating. So the Reserve Bank of India is in a bit of a trap, because on the one hand, it wants some depreciation to happen because of the fact that otherwise your exporters will lose their competitiveness, because the Malaysian ringgit and Thai baht and so on, not Thai baht so much, but the ringgit and so on, are going down more. So you lose certain competitiveness vis-a-vis these currencies. But on the other, if your rupee keeps depreciating, then foreign institutional investors who have invested here, they bring their dollars in, they convert it into rupees, they invest in the stock market, then they sell their stocks, then convert it back into dollars and go. If meanwhile the rupee is depreciated, the profit that they would get goes down. So they will start moving back. So on the one hand, you don't want too much of depreciation, because if the depreciation goes beyond a certain threshold, you will have a large exodus. We're already seeing an exodus of foreign institutional investment, and that will aggravate the depreciation, because if foreign currency keeps going out because foreign investors are pulling out, the rupee will depreciate even more. So on the one hand, you want to protect the rupee from falling, because you don't want the FIIs to run away or run away too fast. On the other hand, you want the rupee to go down, because you want to protect your exporters, because the other currencies are depreciating. So they are trapped. They just don't know what to do in a situation in which the global economy is working that way. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. So my question is, America is America today because of a lot of hard work they have put as part of global aid. They have given their presence in global organizations, and in fact the Hollywood movies showing us soft power. But now this current Trump administration is looking so deep internal, like they are exiting out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and they're moving out, stopping the financial aid. So what do you think is their long-term vision? So will America be America if they just look at internal matters and just look finance in terms of global power? And the second question is that reciprocal tariff. So that, because I was there in the first term of Trump when I was in US, so this kind of, this is new what I'm seeing here. But it's not possible, like, you know, Americans can't work at the rates that India, Philippines and many other countries work, because they have labor contract agreement, the least amount they need to pay wages. So how do you think that these two issues will be, how Trump administration is seeing this?
You know, there are two elements of American withdrawal from the WHO, from the Paris Agreement. The huge cuts in US aid, which have been announced. They're sacking workers who are aid workers, who, you know, HIV providers, treatment providers in Africa and so on. One aspect of that is basically the notion that if there is any international agreement, like agreements through the WTO, like agreements through the Paris Agreement and so on, which is putting constraints or limits on the functioning of US capital. You want to, why should I be party to it? I don't want to be party to a treaty which is against me, because you guys have got so much benefit out of me over these years, and I got nothing out of you, and on top of that, I'm supposed to join these organizations and support that. So that's one aspect, that you're withdrawing because you want to protect American capital, or you think you're going to protect American capital that way. The other reason you're withdrawing is because you want to take every penny out of the system in order to pay your big businesses. You actually want to close down large parts of the American state, because you want to create a situation in which partly you want to remove regulation, but partly you want to release money which you can use to give tax concessions to corporate America. You want to, you want to use, because sometimes Trump says, listen, when I put these tariffs, I'm going to get more revenues, and I can use the revenues for America's good. So you want to get money from there in terms of saying that I'm going to. So the second thing is you're trying to get as much money as you can back, because you think you've been spending too much money and others have benefited from it, but your capital has not got the benefit of it, and you want to give them benefits, and you want to take every penny both internally and internationally, and therefore you want to withdraw. Now the thing is, will that affect America's soft power? Of course it will affect America's soft power. More important than that, if you actually turn against your own allies, there'll be no trust. I mean, how can you be a global hegemon if you're telling your allies, I'm going to walk out on you? But the point is, you can have a belief that, listen, what I need is not soft power. What I need is hard power and cunning diplomacy. I'll sleep with the Russians in order to fix the Europeans. I will tell Greenland, I'm going to, if you either give me Greenland, I'll tell Denmark, you either give me Greenland, or I'm going to send my army to Greenland. So you have this kind of a, you're saying that I'm not going to allow you to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. I want it to be called the Gulf of America. And if Associated Press does not agree to calling it Gulf of America, they cannot attend press conferences in the White House. So you got this huge aggression in which you're saying that I'm going to use hard power. But I'm not looking for soft power because I want this money back because I want to pay off my capitalists. The other thing is, okay, Americans, but depends on how much, if you have a 20% tariff across the board on imports from Canada and the USA, even if you're paying your workers well, by the way, there is a huge shift to casual employment and precarity in the United States workforce. There are more people in the gig economy there and working in McDonald's and Walmart and so on at daily wages which are not anything you can speak of, okay? And there are some states which have tried to impose some kind of a minimum wage. In most states, the minimum wage is extremely poor. But, okay, even granting that there are certain areas in which you're providing them certain benefits and so on, and you have a workforce which has got attuned to that, if you put a 20% tax, the price of imports are going to go up by 20%. That should be enough to protect you, and otherwise you turn against your workers. But what you're trying to do in the first instance is to buy out a white working class, which, because it was left behind by globalization during the period, between the end of the 1960s and 1990s, decided to vote for this maverick. I mean, they're complete loyalists. They were willing to actually tear down the White House, saying that they had fixed the election against Trump the last time he lost. That's the kind of backing he has from the Rust Belt working class, but the white working class. So the way I see it is that he will go as far as possible to take a part of this money and throw crumbs at this white working class because they are loyalists and he likes those who are loyal to him. But on the other hand, much of the money is actually going to pay off American capital.
Next question.
Hello, sir. Hi, sir. So I just wanted to ask, you said after 2008, capitalism has lost its legitimacy. So I just want to understand this more because, as you said, financial speculation has been prevalent throughout capitalism's history. But what about the technological side? Because a lot of the technology, I don't believe that all of the technology was developed during the World War II time. Because a lot of the technology that we see has actually developed beyond 1970. That's when most of the technology companies actually created products and sold to customers and created a lot of the wealth. And even Elon Musk, he is not a person who's made his wealth through financial speculation, not of a hedge fund manager, he's not an investor. He is an investor, but he invests in technology companies. So what do you think about the legitimacy that technology, innovation and growth provides to capitalism?
And that's a good question. But first let me say, I'm not saying that there is no technological change under capitalism occurring. I'm only saying is that the ability to get the productivity increases that you got in the period after the Second World War, because there was a shelf of blueprints which existed of technologies which had come as collateral out of defense research, allowed such increases in productivity. But in fact, after 1968, productivity growth in the United States is really low. It's lower than it is. I mean, you just do a Google of Robert Gordon. He's considered to be one of the most famous, analysts of productivity trends in the United States economy. And he says that, listen, we've entered a period after the 1960s in which American productivity growth has come down. So that's number one. But that doesn't mean there's been no technologies. But I want to go one step further. In a world of finance, in a world of financial speculation, what we see as technology itself changes. So I don't know. I mean, is Google a search engine or, which okay, it developed that technology and then it keeps developing on it? Or is it some great high-tech firm? Is Amazon, basically a marketplace which aggregates sellers and, connects them to buyers? Or is it some great technology firm? And then when you say, oh, listen, AI, we need to put tons and tons of money into AI. And why do we need to put tons and tons of money into AI? Because this is what's going to make us, keep our leadership vis-a-vis China, etc. And what are you going to get out of it? What you're going to get out of it is huge valuations. That is, you have people funding new firms, calling them tech firms, independent of what they do. And you then, on that basis, expect valuations to go up. Each time they go for a new funding round, you see a huge jump in the valuation of the firm. That's because of the fact that there is finance speculating on those firms and calling them tech firms. Then suddenly one entity called DeepSeek comes and says, listen, at a fraction of your cost and fraction of using chips which are not even as great as you think you need, I can do exactly what you're doing. Right up front. So, finance itself changes the way you understand technology. And, what is X? What is X? Okay, it's an idea. It requires a little bit of technology, but it doesn't make it a high-tech firm, can I equate it to a technology in which I say that I have, an idea which is a set of inputs which goes through a production process with a certain organizational framework and generates for me a predetermined output in a way in which I can actually keep costs low? That's a technology for me. That's the way we used to understand technologies, not in terms of the fact that you can actually get a lot of people come and put in, 500 characters or 600 characters and say, oh, we are great. And if you don't like it, you start another one. And because, Trump is kept out of, not anymore, but used to be kept out of X. So that's the way, we should realize that the idea of American technological superiority is partly shaped by finance itself.
It's a wonderful lecture. It gives a excellent overview of the American economy. So I have one question on that. Now, you said that they are facing crisis because they are transferring money from the bottom to the top. Apart from that, we find that there are huge trade deficit the country is facing apart from the federal deficit. Because of that, there is a possibility of losing the status of global currency, American dollar as a global currency. Is that added upon that? Is it also added upon the entire crisis? That's my question.
Well, I'm not as optimistic as you are about the possibility that the dollar would lose its dominance, because America had lost its trade competitiveness by the end of the 1960s. It started registering current account deficits by the end of the 1960s. If it wasn't exporting a lot of services, in particular financial services and so on, the current account deficit would have been even higher. But that didn't undermine, for all these years, the strength of the dollar. Because the strength of the dollar comes from the fact that it is the global military hegemon. Okay? Now the thing is, and therefore the world's wealth holders, including wealth holders in a country like China, prefer to hold their wealth in dollars rather than hold their wealth in RMB or in euro or in yen or whatever it may be, because of the fact that they think that this is the safest, dollar-denominated assets are the safest assets in which I can keep my wealth, because I want to protect my wealth. Okay? So long as that is the case, and that trust and faith comes because of the military prowess of the United States of America and its willingness to exercise that prowess when needed, you're not going to see, unless that changes, you're really not going to see a significant undermining. But it is true that what is happening is not so much that, there's a China, of course there's China, there's a BRICS and so on and so forth. But what is happening is sanctions. If, as part of sanctions, America keeps moving countries out of the dollar network. If you say that, listen, you're Russia, you're fighting in Ukraine, I'm going to take you out of SWIFT. You can't use the SWIFT network for financial transactions. So a country which is trading with Russia cannot pay in dollars through the SWIFT network because sanctions apply to, and not just it applies to Venezuela and so on and so forth. So if you do sanctions, then what happens is these countries have to find ways, because people won't. Look at it. India imports crude from Russia after all the Ukraine war, and then processes it and sells hydrocarbon products to Europe, because it's getting crude cheap from Russia, because Russia is trying to find partners. The point is then, what about the payment system? And then you say, okay, let's try and have some bilateral payment settlement system. Or countries say with China, let's have a bilateral payment settlement system. If you end up with a situation where increasingly you create an environment as the hegemon, where you're trying to keep some people out of the global payments and settlement system, that sets off a tendency, which is what tendency? That the percentage of transactions which are denominated not in the dollar, but in some other currency, keeps increasing. So the larger the percentage of the share of global transactions getting denominated in non-dollar currencies, that is weakening the dollar. So it's not weakening the dollar because of the current account deficit of the United States, it's weakening the dollar because the United States is trying to say that by just saying that you cannot be part of the dollar's payment and settlement system network, you would be finished in the global economy. You're not finished. You continue trading with countries. You continue selling them, military equipment. You continue giving them oil. You continue giving them, whatever else you're giving them. And that is what I think is really one area in which the weakness of the dollar comes from. That you're forcing the growth of a non-dollar denominated transaction economy.
So let us have the final question from the audience.
Sir, talked about BRICS and an alternative currency which will be emerging shortly. And you told about that the dollar is being kept very high and it is facilitating the markets, capital markets. On the other hand, it is also destroying the capital what we used to borrow from LIBOR, which is around 2%. LIBOR is nothing but London interbanking offered rate.
Yes.
So supposing we borrow at 70 rupees and we keep it for 5 years and repay it at 86, will it create a burden on us? Why the government is not looking on that? And number 3, Trump is full of theatrics. I think that tariff war will not pay for him because the BRICS is there to support the other countries also. If they're not going to do business with America, probably they might shift to BRICS. And what is your take on that?
The BRICS is still to do things which, China does things which gives it a position in the global economy vis-a-vis a large number of less developed countries, including, of course, through the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia does things which gives it a certain status, partly because of the benefit it has of oil reserves and gas reserves. But as BRICS, I don't see, this currency is not coming. There's no BRICS currency, at least in the very, 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 near and foreseeable future. So, I think that, just let me give you an example. First of all, the New Development Bank is not even as important today as the AIIB, that is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is dominated, of course, it's also a multi-country bank, but it's dominated by China. Whereas NDB is not dominated by China, it's got a degree of equal partnership and it's structured to have an equal partnership between the different countries. And NDB is nowhere near as important, whereas AIIB is now, nearing importance, which is equivalent to the World Bank in many contexts. The second thing is, at the same time when NDB was set up, the BRICS set up a thing called the Contingency Reserve Arrangement, the CRA. What is the Contingency Reserve Arrangement? The arrangement was that if a developing country is facing balance of payments problems, is facing liquidity problems, that they could approach the CRA, in which these countries which have surpluses will put a part of their surpluses or commit to part of their surpluses to borrow these surpluses in order to be able to tide over the liquidity problem which arises because of the fact that their dollar reserves are falling. Because they are facing some trade problems, they are facing some collapse in tourism, or coffee prices have fallen, or whatever it may be. So the CRA was supposed to be a way in which, that you actually offer an alternative, let us say, to the IMF in a context of balance of payment stringency. But when they drafted the CRA, they basically said that, listen, if you really want to get money from the CRA, you must go and first take up a program under the IMF. And the IMF must certify that you're adopting policies which will restore stability in your economy, in your balance of payments. Then we'll give you money from the CRA. Now, if I'm a developing country and I have to go to the IMF to get a certificate by entering into a structural adjustment program or a stabilization program under the IMF in order to get money from the CRA, why would I go to the CRA? I'll just go to the IMF. So, why are they doing that? They're doing that because of the fact that they don't want to set up a surveillance and monitoring mechanism of their own to see whether the money they're giving is not being, blown up to build some of the tallest tower in the world or something in the middle of Colombo, wherever it may be. But Why are they not in a position to be able to set up that scrutiny and that monitoring and surveillance agency? It's because they don't trust each other. That China doesn't trust in India, and India doesn't, Russia has problems with some of these countries. So because they don't trust each other, they don't set up a secretariat and the equivalent of an IMF themselves. So you can see that even when they're actually taking initiatives which are supposed to make a difference, I don't think they're really going very far in terms of. So as of now, I don't think it really is a force. It's only a voice. That at least there is a platform in which there is a developing country voice which is being asserted, as opposed to, let's say, what would be the case in the IMF or the World Bank. And the UN is huge and large, but that is also a platform where developing country voices get heard. But this is a voice in which some of the stronger developing countries can express their voice. And that's important in the world in a situation of geopolitical uncertainty. Even being able to get your voice heard is something. But that's really not going to change the structure of inequality in the world system. That's the way I see it, or generate a currency which can actually make a difference to the position of the dollar as it stands today. About your doubt about whether the tariff thing will continue, a lot of people have this view that, Trump is a maverick, he'll say one thing, these are all negotiating devices, that finally he's not going to implement all of this. I mean, they said that with respect to Doge, They just, come on, he's sacking generals. He's closing down US aid. He raised the issue of soft power. What is it? It's a small amount of money for America. Why would he want to close that down? So there are things. The people said that no, he's not going to do it. He just talks. But the point is, he's doing things. He's put 10% on China. He's going to do possibly the reciprocal tariffs. He may not do 20% on Canada and Mexico because they're such close allies, and because of the fact that a car which is produced in that region, in the Mexico, Canada region, moves across both the Mexican US border and the Canadian US border about 8 times. Because, cars get assembled in stages and they keep moving up and down. So if you start putting these tariffs on each time there's a movement into your country, that doesn't essentially mean that you're going to have a significant increase in automobile production. It might actually lead to a collapse of the automobile sector, and you will have the likes of Germany and China. Of course, they wouldn't let China into their cars into their economy, producing the cars for the rest of the world. So I'm not so. I mean, he might not go the whole hog, but there is something happening in this capitalism today, and that's what I'm trying to argue. I mean, of course, it's my argument.
Thank you, sir. May I call upon Mr. Raju, Librarian and Information Officer of ACL, to share the stage with our speaker for the prize distribution for the question answer participants. So all the participants, all the questioners, please come and you can collect your prize. Vijayan sir. Rest of you can also come. Thank you, sir. Now we have come to the final part of the program, and now it is time for vote of thanks. It is a privilege and honor to deliver the vote of thanks for this program. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to the Directorate of Public Libraries and Anna Centenary Library for organizing this event. We thank Dr. Chandrasekar for having delivered a wonderful talk. We express our sincere thanks to the ACL team, our IT team, and the audience for their support and active participation. Thank you, one and all. Let us all raise for the national anthem. जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय